chastise his fellow Republicans. Here he is talking to NBC's Garrett Haake.
I would say two attacks I've heard Republicans give that are totally stupid and dumb to do is the DEI attack. This DEI, that seems like a petty. Look, I disagree with DEI, but she is the vice president of the United States. She is the former U.S. senator. These congressmen that are saying it, they're wrong in their own instance.
It's a bit more than petty, though, isn't it? Yeah, you know it is. Here's former Republican Congressman Adam Kinzinger calling it out for exactly what it is.
This is a disgusting dog whistle. It's not even a dog whistle anymore. It's an outright whistle. What they're saying is only white men are deserving of certain positions.
How did that work out, right? How'd your white man do? Today in a speech in Indianapolis, Vice President Harris stood above this fray, keeping her focus on the future and on the issues and the dangers of a second Trump term. Watch.
Across our nation, we are witnessing a full-on assault on hard-fought, hard-won freedoms and rights. The freedom to vote, the freedom to be safe from gun violence, the freedom to live without fear of bigotry and hate, the freedom to love who you love openly and with pride, the freedom to learn and acknowledge our true and full history, and the freedom of a woman to make decisions about her own body and not have her government telling her what to do. In this moment, our nation, as it always has, is counting on you to energize, to organize, and to mobilize. We know when we organize, mountains move. When we mobilize, nations change. And when we vote, we make history.
The GOP, stoking racism in America as the de facto Democratic nominee, focuses on the future and what is possible. It's where we start today. With me at the table, former Assistant U.S. Attorney, President of the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, Maya Wiley's here, plus Princeton University professor, distinguished political scholar, and author Eddie Glaude is here, and chief political columnist and host of the podcast In Politic for Puck, MSNBC national affairs analyst John Heilman's here. Also joining us, MSNBC political analyst Erin Haynes. She's the editor-at-large for the 19th and host of the podcast The Amendment. Maya Wiley, the vice president, is not engaged in any of this. She has proven herself already, not just in 3 days as the de facto nominee, but in months now on the campaign trail, as focused on a rather singular message: we're not going back. And her crowds are already chanting that.
Yeah, and there's a direct line, Nicolle, from the DE&I attack to Project 2025, this blueprint that says very explicitly that it wants to go after all the protections we created in civil rights laws through the civil rights movement, through the 60 years, sitting here on the 60th anniversary of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. When you hear them say she's a DE&I fill in the blank, in addition to its overt racism and sexism, and I'm going to say it out loud, it is overtly sexist and racist to say that by virtue of the fact that she's a woman and a woman of color, she's not qualified, because that's all they're saying, is exactly the same thing that they've put in the blueprint as the plan for the country, to say we will undermine the ability of the federal government to assert, enforce, and protect us from employment discrimination, that we will try to close and shutter the Department of Education if we can. But if we can't, we'll just make sure any of the complaints of our children, whether they're being bullied because they're Jewish, by the way, or because they're Muslim, or because they're Black or Asian or anything else, we're going to take the power of them to force our civil rights laws away to protect our children in schools. That is what was in the Civil Rights Act of 1964. This messaging is explicit in that project, and what Kamala Harris is doing, both as a vice president, because I've been with her when she has made these statements as a vice president as a matter of policy, and what she's explaining to the American public is we have a choice for the future, and it's either to be in the future or it's to go back to the dark ages. And I think she's making it plain and clear.
I mean, the only fight that's being that's sort of underway is on the right? You got Kevin McCarthy and Adam Kinzinger, two Republicans, scolding Republicans, voices on the right, making this attack. Not only, I would guess, because it's immoral, but because it stinks as a political line of attack.
Yeah, I don't think they can do it, though. The toothpaste is out of that tube.
Yeah.
I mean, the entire MAGA movement is predicated on this not even dog whistle, on this grievance, on this sense of hatred. The sense of the demographic shifts in the country, that the browning of America, the idea that big government has put its thumb on the scale such that these folk can jump ahead of the line, the very ways in which merit is being deployed in order to, shall we say that someone like me shouldn't be at Princeton, for example, because it's precisely because of affirmative action. So all of that has been at the heart of MAGA since he came down the escalator. So the idea that somehow we're going to go back to the 90s and the 80s and do dog whistles? No, foghorns. That's all they do is foghorns.
I don't know how to say this carefully, but I'd like to say it carefully. But Donald Trump is someone so supremely unqualified. Republican Senator Bob Corker described the West Wing as daycare. His generals took him to a tank to explain. I think they had maps and diagrams and crayons involved. General Kelly, his chief of staff, described him as, quote, the most damaged human being he ever met. And he picked a guy to be his running mate who was his son's pal who's been in the Senate for 15 minutes. This seems like a bizarre line of attack. Qualifications?
Well, it honestly doesn't seem bizarre to me. It seems to be bizarre to me if we're having this conversation among us. You know, for the vast majority of voters in America, he's been the president of the United States. He's passed the qualification test. He was commander in chief for 4 years. All the things you just said are true. I'm not advocating for them. I'm saying you look at this electorate, 7% roughly of undecided voters out there. You're not going to win a quality. You can attack Trump's character. You can attack his fitness. You can attack his morals. You can attack his accordance with the law. You're not going to win an argument by trying to attacking Trump on qualifications. For most Americans, he was president. That matter's been settled. With her, I do think, and this goes to the thing about what's actually old about this is it's a tool that Republicans have had in their bag for a long time. Mm-hmm. And Maya said the thing that's most on point about this. This is an effort to disqualify her. It is a racist attempt to disqualify her. It's a misogynist attempt to disqualify her. But disqualification is the objective. You go back to 1995, 1996, the Clinton campaign defined Bob Dole, who was a person that had been in the Senate for a million years already in 1996. They defined him as being old and out of step with America. Your campaign in 2004 with John Kerry defined Kerry just at the moment when he was. People don't realize how these people are supposedly famous. They're not famous in America. You defined John Kerry as a flip-flopper before he was against it. All the things you guys did. The Obama campaign in 2011, in early 2012, defined Mitt Romney, rich guy out of touch, doesn't care about people like you. They have a window, the Republican campaign, a very narrow window. That's part of the whole newness of this, 4 weeks. And their goal is to define her as unqualified. And for this Republican Party that has lived in the world of racial dog whistles or foghorns for a long time, the tool in their bag, they're going to reach for that tool. They don't have another tool. But what's weird about it is that it is so out of step with where America is now that the question of I have no doubt Adam Kinzinger is making a different argument about why it's inappropriate than Kevin McCarthy is. Kevin McCarthy, in this case, is making an argument of efficacy. And he's basically saying, guys, this argument feels like we are not in Willie Horton. It's not 1988 anymore. It's not 1998 anymore. It's 2024. The argument in a world of women in the workforce, in a world of a brown America, where you have people who are qualified, the DEI, most people don't know what that is in America. To the extent that they know, they probably have someone in their family who's been part of those programs. They're so systematized that to sort of say, you're unqualified, and use that as an epithet is just beyond its racism and misogyny, is also just going to fail as a disqualification mechanism, because too many people look at people who have benefited from diversity programs and from affirmative action and other things and say, well, those people are perfectly qualified. You know, they do their job well.
Let me just use your own logic. She's the vice president. I mean, she's also qualified.
I think that, well, there's a lot of things to say about that, obviously, but I do think there's a large gap of knowledge in the country about, I would say this about any vice president, by the way. I think that, you know, at the end of 4 years, how many people in America, besides knowing what Mike Pence did on January 6th, what did Mike Pence do in office? To the average voter, no one has any idea. No one had much of an idea what Al Gore did when he was vice president. People thought certain things about Dick Cheney because he was a slightly different kind of kettle of fish. But that was true of Joe Biden when Obama was vice president. You can make the argument that I am qualified in name, but you're not commander in chief when you're vice president. You are someone who's been appointed. You ran on a ticket, but there's a lot of definitional lack of clarity about any vice president. And because of the fact that it's this narrow window, I just think that they don't have a lot of other clubs in their bag. This is what we're going to see. I again agree it's racist. I agree it's misogynist. But also, I think more importantly, maybe not more importantly, but as importantly, it is unlikely to be effective. And I don't think right now, on the basis of what I'm hearing from people who are out in the field right now, that are measuring already the effectiveness, the traction that these techniques are having, it is not cutting ice right now with voters. So far.
The other thing, Aaron, is all she has to do is open her mouth, and her political talents alone, forget the people that don't know what a vice president does. And I'm not sure watching President Biden go from being a vice president to a president. The whole country knows who Mike Pence is. The right hates him for not carrying out the coup, and the left looked at him differently after he refused to finish. I mean, I think we're in a moment where people are sort of aware of what and who a vice president is and does. But the minute they see her and the minute she opens her mouth and the minute if you hear one thing from her speeches, it's future past, future past. We haven't had a candidate making that kind of contrast since President Barack Obama.
Yeah, and I mean, you're seeing Vice President Kamala Harris already starting to define herself. And how is she doing that? She's defining herself as somebody who is ready to make the case against a second Trump presidency, casting him as a criminal and a threat to our democracy. She's owning her own story. That is happening, you know, as Republicans are resorting to, you know, that kind of familiar playbook that John mentioned, where, and especially for former President Trump, who, you know, attacks women by calling them dishonest, questioning their intelligence, commenting on their looks. You know, in some of our latest reporting for the 19th, we're already talking about the racist and misogynist disinformation that's already targeting Harris, and we're just a few days into her campaign, right? Like, it's a train that's never late. During the primary, Trump called Nikki Haley, you know, former governor and UN ambassador, a bird brain. Hillary Clinton was crooked, right? He's maligned Fani Willis and Tish James, black women prosecutors like Kamala Harris, right? Has tried to paint them as corrupt or incompetent and accusing them of being the racist. These are not new attacks, and you know, these attacks, when Republicans make them, whether it's former President Trump or, you know, people on you know, right-wing media, or, you know, Republican politicians, like, it always says more about them than it does about the people that they are talking about. And while it may be a dog whistle to, you know, some number of Republican voters that this has worked on over the years, maybe in previous races, it is also a signal. I mean, how many women, how many people of color, you know, have heard DEI or have heard, you know, suggestions that maybe they didn't earn, you know, the job that they got, or they shouldn't be the place that they're in. That kind of language also galvanizes them. So I'm sure that Republicans like Kevin McCarthy and Adam Kinzinger are trying to discourage Republicans from using that kind of language, because what it does is it actually energizes, you know, folks for whom that kind of language sounds familiar, to get out and vote to reject that kind of language, to reject those kinds of politics.
Yeah, I mean, and let me just follow on sort of John's thread about McCarthy's beef with it, because it is distinct from Kinzinger. And Adam Kinzinger had endorsed